Hello, my name's Julie, and today I'm talking about the tons of books that I read in August. If you were here for my wrap-up last month, you can check that out here. You saw that I had my biggest reading month of all time last month with a record number of pages, and this month, I didn't quite hit that record number of pages, but I did break my record for the number of books I read. I read 16 books in August, which is absolutely ridiculous. And we got a bunch of weird stats being thrown and a lot of weird coincidences between the books. So let's get into my stats and then I'll tell you about all the books that I read. So as I said, I read 16 books in August with a total of 5,647 pages. That was 20 pages more than my previous best page record, but now it's behind by like 150 pages. So it's still my second best month of all time in pages. I had an average rating of a 3.75, which is a little bit above average. I had one proper 5-star that I gave out, which out of 16 isn't great, but I had some high 4s. I read 6 books from my shelf, and then I added 5 books to my shelf, which is more than I have been normally doing, so maybe a haul is incoming. And then I unhauled 0 books for my TBR. So I right now have an annual net TBR shelf of -8. Still in the right zone. If we look at my star ratings graph, I have nothing under a 3-star, which is great. I have some no ratings, but we'll get into why. Then let's look at our pie charts because they are crazy this month. I read every single genre that I put into my spreadsheet this month. This is the first time I think that may have ever happened. For series, I only read 1 book in a series this month, which oops, and it was a first book in a series. 7 of the books that I read were audiobooks and the rest were physical, and 2 of the books that I read were YA and the rest were adult. Let's get straight into our reviews. So the first 7 books that I read this month were for my readathon friendathon, which is about reading your friends' tastes in books. I vlogged all of that experience, so I gave very in-depth feelings of those books as I read them. So these first 7 reviews are going to be shorter. If you want to see my full reviews, you can check out the vlogs here. But the first book that I read this month was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This is a historical fiction that came out a couple years ago. It was very popular, and it is about our main character, Elizabeth Zott, who is a female chemist in the 60s, which was very frowned upon at the time. She ends up becoming a single mother, fired from her job. Even though she is a genius, she gets hired as the host of a daytime cooking show, and that ends up giving her a platform to encourage a lot of women to go into sciences, even though this is not at all the job that she wants, and she's really frustrated by that. I really, really enjoyed this one. I loved the quick wit of this and how it balanced comedic things with a lot of serious issues. I think that this did such a good job portraying how women going into the workplace were often not only met with harassment, but with violence, and how it was actually a dangerous thing for a woman to go to work, even though it was a necessity. I really enjoyed a lot of our characters, especially Elizabeth. I loved every time she spoke. I really liked seeing her on the TV show. I think if you like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you'll really enjoy this because of the setting, but also the writing. The only thing that I would mark this book off for is I think like the last act or so, we spent too much time in the heads of other people who weren't our main character, and I kind of just wanted to know what she was thinking and see from her perspective. I can see from a literary standpoint why that decision might have been made. Doesn't mean I agree with it. I really enjoyed this one, and it's going to be an easy recommendation for a lot of people. This I gave a 4.5. Then I read Pure Nessie by Susanna Clark. This is a very short fantasy mixed with literary novel. It's a very strange book, and there's not a lot you can say without giving away spoilers, but our main character, Pure Nessie, lives in the house, which is this infinite building of 3 floors that just go on forever. There are oceans that roll in and recede. There are these strange statues everywhere, and Pure Nessie has spent a lot of time journaling about what he explores in the house. And there's only one other person that he's ever interacted with, and that is this person called the Other, who is trying to get him to go on this journey for a great knowledge that he doesn't really know what it is. But I really enjoyed this one. I would say at least the first like 50%. I just didn't want to put it down. I did really like seeing from Piranesi as a character. There are definitely things that you as a reader pick up on before Piranesi, but he's still such a great character to follow that that's not bothersome that he's not picking up on things. The setting of this is so unique. It's very singularly evocative. It feels like a strange dream. I don't know if this would count as a spoiler, but this book reminded me of the allegory of the cave as we are following Piranesi trying to make sense of things around him when he does not have all the answers. I think I got what there is to get out of this, but it wasn't as like emotionally impactful as I thought I was going to be getting into. It definitely fits into the dark academia theme if you're into that, and I had a good time with it. So I'm giving it a 4. Would definitely check out her other stuff. The next book I read during the readathon was Life of Pi by Jan Martel. This is about a Indian boy named Pi who is the son of a zookeeper, and he loves every single religion he's come across and wants to participate in all of them, and people have a problem with that. And then when his family is going to be immigrating to Canada alongside a lot of these zoo animals that they are transporting with them, the ship gets wrecked and Pi seems to be the only human survivor on a small raft with some of the zoo animals, including the tiger Richard Parker. So I don't know what I thought this book was going to be. Before I read it, I knew it was going to be philosophical in some way. It does very much deal with religion, but does not deal specifically with any one of the like major religions because our main character is such a big fan of all of them and sees them all as aspects of God, a higher power, which I thought was a really interesting message. Him trying to survive is definitely harrowing, and his story of perseverance is very powerful. There's like a metaphor that's going on, and then at the end of the book they like reveal what the metaphor is. I don't know if like straight out revealing what the metaphors are is the strongest way to end a book. I don't think it personally impacted me a huge amount like it seems to have done a lot of other people, and I don't know how long it's going to stay with me, so I'm giving this a 3-star. Then I read a nonfiction, which is Behind the Beautiful Forevers by Catherine Boo. This takes place over the course of 2008 in a slum just outside of the Mumbai airport called Anawadi, and it is about a bunch of different people who live there and how they are struggling with the poverty that they are in. These people are better off than a lot of people around them, but they are still in this slum where they do not have the money or the food or the resources that the richest of the rich who are right next door to them have. And we see how they're sort of beat down from every angle and how these people are trying to get out, but how a lot of the system is rigged. I think Catherine Boo did a really great job in this book, covering a lot of different scenarios and showing just the devastation that this can wreak on people. But despite that, how people are still reaching for a better life. I think that this made a subject that you might not know anything about very approachable by showing just the everyday lives of different people who are trying to go through entrepreneurial or political or educational things to get themselves out of the situation. I did think that this was very effective at what it was trying to do, and I am not going to be reading this because I don't really read a lot of this type of nonfiction, so I don't feel qualified to do that. Then I read Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. This is a short story collection of mostly sci-fi, sometimes fantasy stories, the most popular of them being Story of Your Life, which inspired the movie Arrival. There are 8 different stories in this. I read 1 story a day. There were 3 stories that I did really enjoy and get something out of. Those were Story of Your Life, Hell is the Absence of God, and Liking What You See, a documentary. I thought those stories were really effective. They pose a lot of questions to the reader while also delving exactly the amount that I wanted into their subject matter. The 3 stories that I liked were like 45% of this book. The 55%, I didn't really care. I thought that a lot of the other stories, they just didn't click with me. They didn't go as far as I wanted, or they weren't as well executed as the other ones that I did like. So this is ending up as a 3-star collection. even though there were a couple that I would consider 5-star stories. Then I read Ready or Not by Kara Bastone. This is a romance. I know I've been holding off on the romance lately, but I'm really glad that I gave this one a shot. This is about our main character, Eve, who ends up pregnant from a one-night stand with a stranger after being single for a long time, and her support system consists of her best friend since she was in elementary school and her best friend's brother who has recently moved back into their area. Her best friend has actually been struggling with infertility, so can't really be there at the moment, but her best friend's brother is stepping up and helping her out. So this is the journey of Eve getting ready to have the baby and dealing with pregnancy and all the body changes that she's having and deciding what she wants to do with her life while also finding love along the way. This was a perfect recommendation for me. I listened to the audiobook of this and I absolutely love the narration. I think the narrator brings out a lot of the humor that is within the main character's inner dialogue. I really loved Eve as a main character. She has been struggling to decide what she really wants to do with her life, and being forced into this new life path, she is learning to figure out what she wants and go for it. I really liked all of the relationships that she has with the different people around her. I thought that a lot of the discussions that I talked about, everything was so well done. And I really couldn't talk enough about how much I really love this book. This is definitely a slow burn romance, and I think that it was such the right move. This really shows how much like people can care about each other before taking next steps. And I think that this is definitely an underrated one that if you haven't read it yet, you should definitely pick it up. I've been putting 5-star question mark, but I think it's a 5-star. And the last book I read for Friendathon was also my book club's pick of August, and that was The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdella. My book club, 3 of Clubs, reads a different theme every quarter. And this quarter for July, August, and September, we're reading about rogues, thieves, and assassin main characters. And if you would like to join us, next month we are going to be reading the Stardust Grail. You can join us in the Discord while we talk about that, but back to Stardust Thief. This is inspired by several stories from the 1001 Nights. This is about our main character, Luli, who she is a person who finds magical items and sells them in this like magic black market. And when she gets found out by an evil prince, she gets sent to try to find the magic lamp alongside the evil prince's brother disguised as the evil prince, alongside the evil prince's best assassin, aka one of the 40 Thieves. This is such a fast-paced fantasy. Once these people go on their adventure, there is no dead air at all. We are moving, everybody's doing something, something's going wrong at every single moment, and I think that that makes this a really easy one to get through. This definitely has a younger writing style. I don't think anything in the plot would lead it to be young adult or adult, but the writing style definitely skews it to feel a little bit more young adult. So if you want a transition book between young adult and adult fantasy, I think this would be a good pick. What will stay with me is more the feeling of this propulsive type fantasy, but I think because it focused so much on that, I didn't actually have time to really build an attachment to any of our characters. I thought this was a good fantasy debut, so I'm giving it a 3.5 star. As the last of my Friendathon reads, then I decided to take a really long pause and pump the brakes on my physical reading. But that meant I was still listening to a ton of audiobooks, so I listened to We Deserve Monuments by Jazz Hammonds. This is a YA contemporary coming-of-age story where our main character has moved from DC, where she has lived her whole life, to her mother's small southern town because her grandmother, who she hasn't met since she was very, very little, is dying. And her grandmother and her mother have a very contentious relationship for reasons that our main character doesn't really know about yet, but seem to be very passionate on both sides. And our main character is adjusting to being a queer black girl in a small southern town, trying to put the family back together while this woman she doesn't know very well is dying, and trying to learn more about her past. Plus, there's some new friends she's making and a girl that she thinks is really cute, and that's a lot of things going on for someone in their senior year of high school. This book came very highly recommended, and I see why. This book is very well constructed. I definitely think that like this is one that would be way up there if I was still in the YA demographic. There's so much going on in this book. It's not that long, but we see so much of a journey with our main character of just understanding how privileged and how different her life has been and how dangerous things have been for people like her. This book definitely deals with generational trauma very heavily and head on. And as our main character is sort of realizing things that happened to her family in the past and how those ramifications are just heading down the different generations, how that's causing conflict between these people where nobody's really 100% in the right or in the wrong. I really loved our main character, and more than anything, I really loved seeing her interact with her mother and her grandmother and trying to get them to have more of a relationship and be honest with each other. The like YA plot of like the friends and the romance I didn't think landed with me as well. It was important to the story. I did not care for it as much as I did the plot with the parents. And there are definitely things that our character is naive about that maybe a reader would not be. I do think that this is a very strong one that still will have reach outside of the YA demographic. So I'm giving this, it's gonna be higher than a 4-star. I think I wrote a 4.25 down, but maybe it should be higher. Definitely a very strong debut novel. Then I read Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel. Heltzel. I didn't see that L before. This is a horror book that I read for the Buzzword Readathon. So the August challenge was to have the word like in the title, and let me tell you, it was hard to find one, so I kind of picked this book up on a whim, just having heard of it and not much else. This is about a woman named Maeve who, when she was very young, she was in a cult with her cousin Andrea. When she was about 10 or so, the cult ended up being discovered and she was adopted while her cousin had stayed in the foster care system and they lost contact. And now, years and years later, the two of them have found each other through DNA testing and they have started trying to reconnect as Maeve is kind of struggling on her own, but she has a life that she likes. Meanwhile, Andrea is the CEO of this lifestyle group that has to do with fertility and helping women who have gone through infertility and trying to get to motherhood, which they sort of see as the highest calling. Maeve is trying to save her relationship with Andrea, but is everything that Andrea's surrounding herself good for Maeve to be around? I really couldn't put down this book. I was supposed to read this book in 3 days. I read it in 2 because I just did not want to put it down, which is exactly what I needed at this moment because at this time of reading, I was reading like 25 pages a day and really just struggling to get a pace up, so I needed a book that would get my pace back up. Some of the horror elements of this I definitely saw coming from a mile away, and it was a little bit more of like watching a car crash and being like, oh shit, I know that's happening. There's definitely some upsetting stuff that happens in those books, but if you need trigger warnings, you might want to do that for this. I just had such a good time, even with terrible things happening in this book, putting together all of the pieces and seeing like a trap just slowly close around our main character. And I'll tell you right now, I was totally 100% fooled by the book in the last like chapter or so. They got me. I thought I was so smart. I had guessed so much of the book, and then the last little bit totally tripped me up. One of my favorite parts of this book was finding out more about the cult in the past, but mostly finding it out through the childhood behaviors of Maeve once she had left the cult. Super interesting way to map out that part of the story. This was just the fun horror that I needed, and I have been really trying to define what my horror taste is, and I've been having a craving for mystery thriller horror, so this is what I needed. So I'm giving this a really solid 4. Then I listened to The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. This is a 2024 release, and it is a sci-fi dystopian mystery. A lot of the world and what's going on is being slowly revealed to the reader over time, and I think that's very well done, so I'll be a little bit vague. But basically, we are on this island surrounded by fog, and this fog seems to have killed off every other person in existence, and it's only the people on this island left. In several hours, a murder is going to occur. Once the murder occurs, the fog is going to start rolling in, and the people on the island have to solve the murder to stop the fog from rolling in and killing the last of humanity. There's also our main characters can all hear this AI who's talking in their mind, who's kind of guiding them through their lives. A lot of weird stuff. I think the strongest portion of this book is the sci-fi dystopian part of it, which is so interesting because I was wanting to read this book for the mystery element of it, but I ended up basically only caring about the sci-fi dystopian part. I don't know that I think that the mystery part of this book was developed as well. There was only so many options that could happen given the amount of attention that was paid to certain things. I didn't really care as much about the investigation of the murder itself because I cared so much more about learning science and dystopian stuff. The introduction of the information when it came to the science stuff was done very well because a lot of our main characters are familiar with this information already, so it has to be slowly introduced to the reader naturally for them to get caught up to speed without it feeling like info dumping, which I think that did fantastic job. Once we figured out like everything to do with that, I was less invested. I don't think there's a lot I can talk about this book without giving anything away because I think a lot of those reveals are really like gasp worthy. So I'm giving this maybe just a 3. I think it's really advertising itself to be a murder mystery. A lot of the plot is dedicated to it being a murder mystery, and that part wasn't really surprising, wasn't the part that I cared about. I wish that this book had decided to focus on different things. And then the reason that I was listening to audiobooks and reading a fast-paced book is because I have finally read Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This is my 5th Jane Austen. I read Pride and Prejudice when I was in 7th grade, and it is still my favorite book. I read Emma in high school, I think. I read Sense and Sensibility and Northanger Abbey in college, and now I have read Mansfield Park, which I have had on this guy for way too long. And it is one of her most like controversial in terms of how people feel about it. This is about Fanny Price, who was raised by a family who had kind of too many kids for their means, and they decided to ask for help from their family monetarily, getting their children jobs. But the rich family decides to just take the eldest daughter as a charity case, essentially, and have her live in their house. And Fanny, at 10 years old, is brought into this rich household of these very privileged people who are her relatives but certainly don't treat her as an equal. And she is in love with her cousin, who is the only person who has ever treated her with any kind of dignity. And we see her as different people come into the lives of the Bertrams. Fanny is sort of the only person to ever see anybody as they actually are. This feels like if Jane Austen was writing the character of Jane Eyre. I don't feel like these books are that similar in terms of like what happens or what the tone is, but this has a main character who is poorer than everyone around her, totally left out, stepped on, and she is rigidly sticking to what she believes, even when she is not allowed to give her opinion. She is very quiet. She barely has any lines in this book because she's just not ever thought to talk. When she finally has the opportunity, it's only because nobody else is around. And people start being like, oh, well, why don't we pay attention to her? It's like, yeah, why don't you? Why don't you treat her like a person instead of your last freaking option? So this was just kind of a frustrating reading experience because it is our main character getting beat down for 400 plus pages. Part of the reason why I really like books like Pride and Prejudice and Emma is because, you know, the people who have done bad things have to fix the bad things that they did, or they are bad people and are punished. And the good people get good things. I kind of thought that, like, there would be a little bit more of a turnaround. There'd be a little bit more of, like, a just desserts. And that's just not the case. Like, our main character ends up getting a happy ending, but she didn't even get as good of like a romantic send off as the other characters do in their books. So I remember thinking halfway through this book, because I was reading like a mystery and a thriller at the same time I was reading this, I was like, I just want this halfway to turn into a murder mystery. Like, I wanted Mrs. Norris to get killed halfway through this book, and for Fanny to solve the murder, and for everyone to love her. At least, even compared to other Jane Austen books, which are not very high on plot, and I also felt like there was a good amount of like repetition. If that was supposed to be exhausting, it worked, because like Fanny just has to kind of go through the same shit over and over again, as she is just tried. So, Fanny, I wish you better luck in your future, because everything about this sucked. I don't know what I want to rate this book. I appreciate a lot of the commentary that this book is talking about the hypocrisy of privileged people and about the fall of the upper class in this era. But it was like kind of frustrating. And should I say that that frustration is part of it and that should be enjoyment? Who knows? But it was a solid one, and Jane, I still love you. Then I listened to My Darling Dreadful Thing by Johanna van Veen. This was for the In the Void book club. This is set in the Netherlands in the 1950s, so post World War II. Our main character is a very lonely girl who has a spirit companion, and her mother has been taking advantage of this situation and running seances because this girl can get actually possessed by the spirit that she has with her. They're doing fake possessions of other spirits that aren't actually possessing her. One of the people who attends this seance is a woman a little bit older than our main character who has lost her husband. Our main character is infatuated with this woman, and all we know is that our main character is being interviewed by a psychiatrist at the time before a court case. I usually do really like the framework of like knowing that a murder is going to occur at the beginning of the book and then leading up to it at the end of the book. Having listened to the audiobook of this, I don't think the interviews were done as well on the audiobook. I think it was really annoying that the narrator would like say who it was every single time instead of just reading it like a conversation. This is definitely a very gothic atmosphere book. The second half of this book 100% feels like Rebecca, where our main character is in a manor house and there's people who aren't telling her things, but this time with a sapphic twist. I liked the flavor of the ghosts. I'm not usually a ghost person, but this was an explanation for ghosts that I quite liked. I think this does exactly what you think it's going to do because it does use that gothic framework so much, but I had an engaging time listening to this, even though you pretty much know where it's headed. I think I'm going to give this a 3.5. I don't know how long it's going to stick around with me, but I had a good time. Then I realized it is Women in Translation Month, and I hadn't read any books that would fit for that. So I picked up Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and this was only a 3-hour audiobook, so I actually turned down the speed. Our main character is a woman who has never really fit in with anyone around her. She doesn't understand a lot of things about society and has struggled with other people's expectations put on her because she does not match up with what society wants for her. So when she is 18, she starts to work at a convenience store. And that amount of routine and being told exactly how social interactions are going to go is a structure that really works for her. She really enjoys her job and she is fantastic at it. She actually knows the intricacies of it so much, the ins and outs, that she is just kind of better at her job than everybody else. But a lot of people look down on her because she is only a convenience store worker. There are two different readings of this book. There is the reading that Furukawa is like a slave to capitalism, that she's a drone, that she can't do anything without capitalism. That is not how I read this book at all. If you're looking for something like that, I think you should definitely read Severance by Ling Ma, which has a zombie metaphor for modern society. But in this book, it was made pretty clear to me that our main character is autistic. The author has not said anything about the main character being autistic, but a lot of our main character's traits, I very much read it as her being autistic, which is funny because I also felt the same way about lessons in chemistry, but that was also not the stated intention of the author. But regardless of if she is or not, it is about a person who doesn't know how to interact with society's rules, finding happiness in something, somewhere where capitalist society has told her she is not supposed to be happy there, and finding joy there, not even despite it. She is just finding joy there, and everybody in the world is so mad that she has found something that she enjoys that she is not supposed to. I love our main character so much for just being able, she found what she likes and she likes it, and when everybody else tries to get in the way, it is so frustrating. People saying that this is like, oh, saying she's like a slave to capitalism is crazy to me. Like, this book is anti-capitalist, like in the idea that like you should be able to find joy in the thing that you do, even if you're not climbing a corporate ladder, even if the thing that you're doing isn't turning over a massive amount of capital. It's like, if you enjoy the thing that you do, you should be able to enjoy it without other people getting in your way. I'm finding myself being very passionate about this book, and maybe I should be giving it a higher rating. I do think the last, like, maybe third of this book went in a weirder direction than I thought it would. Not in weird as in, like, speculative fiction, but just, like, in what our kind of main character puts up with. But I think it points a mirror on a lot of things that people are judgmental about, that I think that this book being so popular is really great. And when we're just following our main character, doing what she loves, it's really sweet and sometimes funny. With the first like 2/3 of this book, this could have been a 5-star, I think, even though it's so short and those don't usually work for me. The last third, I don't think it did anything wrong. I just felt kind of weird about it. So I'm giving this high 4-star, 4+. Then for my 12 Friends, 12 Months, 12 Books challenge, I picked up Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Coopersmith. This was from my friend Jasmine, who we have been mutuals for a very long time. Glad I got around to this one because, wow, this one did kind of surprise me. This is a speculative fiction that takes place in Vietnam and is surrounding a lot of Vietnamese myth and folklore, especially around ghosts. We follow a bunch of different perspectives jumping around in time, but there are two events that are being tied together. And one of them is in 2011. A woman who is mixed Vietnamese has come from the US to teach in Vietnam, and she has gone missing. There was also a teenage girl who in the 60s went missing on this rubber plantation. And we keep having characters weave from one to the other. This is such a good recommendation for me. 100% totally something I love. Like, everything about this on paper, love. I think towards the end of the book, I kind of got a little bit muddled with everything that was going on, so it wasn't a full 5-star. But this recommendation was fantastic. I really like the writing style of this. The main character sort of reminded me of some of the like apathetic, like sad girl books where she is just in such a state of depression that she can't get herself out of, that I think was really well done. And I really loved seeing all these different events and people show up in different times and places and finding out that they're the same person as over here, giving such a vivid picture of Vietnam over decades and how it has been colored by the war and colonialism. And I thought the ghost story element of this was really great because of how it was interwoven into the very realistic elements to create what became a stronger story. Again, another 4+. We're winning this month. The second to last book that I read this month was actually a reread, and that was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. This came out in 2017. I read it like as soon as it came out because I've got one of those signed editions when you pre-order it. John Green is one of my favorite people on the internet and writers, but the movie of this came out in May and I'm going to be watching it very soon, so I decided to reread it to see the comparisons between the two. But this is about our main character, Asa, who struggles with OCD, which is something that John Green has dealt with himself, and this is very much inspired by his own experience with OCD, as she is going through a mental health crisis and doesn't really want to alert anybody else to it or even admit herself that she is in a crisis. Meanwhile, the plot of it is that a billionaire has gone missing. She knows his son, and there is a $10,000 reward for any information about him. I looked back at my review and I gave this a 4-star when I read it, and I think I should have given it like a 4.5 or something like that. I definitely think John inserts a few too many quotes into this book in a way that feels really unnatural, but I think the overall mental health story of this is so strong. I think I felt more of a kinship with Asa now. It's her feeling trapped within her own body and mind. And I think one of the strongest portions of this is the friendship that Asa has with Daisy and how it is strained by Asa's condition, and how the two of them, neither one of them is completely right or wrong. Interactions that they have in this book are so well written and pointed out, and how everybody's flawed, but both of them hurt each other in some way. And I really do love this book. I love John Green's writing and his stories, and I cannot wait to watch the movie. I've only heard good things. I also don't reread very often. This is the first reread I've done this year. It'll probably be the last one. I don't like rereading books very often, but when there's an adaptation, I use it as an excuse. Mainly, I just feel bad for new books that I'm not reading because I read this instead, but the audiobook was 7 hours. I knocked half of it out in a car trip, but I also, what do I put in my spreadsheet when I do a reread? Do I count it towards my genre statistics, or do I put reread instead of an author that is not new to me? I don't know. The last book that I read this month was Magpie by Elizabeth Day. I just needed one quick book to finish at the end of the month with the last couple days that I had left, and I had been in the mood for some sort of thriller, so I decided to pick something that has been on my shelf for too long. And this was sent to me by Simon & Schuster, the publisher, right when I was first getting sent ARCs. And I just said, yeah, sure, I'll read it, not thinking I was going to get sent it. And then I didn't prioritize it, so I thought, let me just read it, and I'll either unhaul it or it'll really surprise me. And it definitely did end up surprising me some. So Marissa and Jake are in a new relationship. They've only been dating for 3 months, but they've already bought a house. They're going to be trying for a baby. Their financial situation has kind of gone through a little bit, so they decide to have a lodger at their house, and that's Kate. And Marissa thinks something is up with Kate, and she's going to figure it out. Have you noticed that this is the third book that had to do with pregnancy that I read this month? Pregnancy or fertility or whatever, all 3 of those involve just as a coincidence. And I also watched season 7 of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, in which they try to get pregnant. And I was like, oh, this is so weird that all of this is happening at once. And then my cousin announced she's pregnant. First baby in the family in 21 years. Absolutely wild. Anyway, it evolves from that synopsis pretty quickly to the point that things are spoilery. I thought I had figured this book out from very early on, but it took a couple of turns away. I think towards the end of the book, I had figured out the end of the book, but I wouldn't have figured out the end of the book from where I thought I had solved the whole thing in 60 pages. So it definitely took me for some turns. It was really easy to get through. I was flipping the pages fast, and I think there's definitely some people to root for here. This book does deal head on with infertility, so I think if you have any triggers around that, this might be a book to skip. But I blew through this and was really having fun with the author turning things on its head. The back half of this book, I was like, oh, okay, this is more predictable. I got a handle on this. I know what's going on. And yeah, I was right. That is what was going on, and it was still fun to get through, but I don't think that this was, besides that one part right there, I don't think it was really extremely memorable. Well, I'll probably give it like a 3. It was okay. Goodness, that took a long time, but I am finally done with all of the books that I read in August. If you'd like to tell me what you read in August, I'd love to hear about it. If you read any of these books and want to tell me what you thought, again, let me know. I'd love to talk to you. If you'd like to follow me anywhere, you can find me at the link in the description. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.